Hello and welcome to a discussion on the topic Religion and Modernization in the Eyes of Max Weber. Let me first give a brief introduction of the man himself, Max Weber. Weber, as many of you might be aware of, was a German sociologist, philosopher and political economist who was born on 21st April 1864 in Erfurt in Germany. Weber enrolled as a law student in the University of Heidelberg in 1882, and just after 7 years he received a doctorate degree for a work on trading societies in Italian cities. Weber did a postdoctoral work on the importance of Roman agrarian history for government and private law, and 3 years later he got a corresponding chair in Heidelberg. However, he quit from his professorship in late 1903. In 1919, Weber accepted an appointment at the University of Munich, but just a year later, that is in 1920, he died of pneumonia at the age of 56. In 1891-92, Weber carried out an empirical study of the condition of farm workers who were working on different estates in East Prussia. From the details he gathered, he noticed the predicament of the estate owners. On the one hand, they inadvertently subverted the German peasants while hiring cheap Polish labor in the production process, and on the other hand, they were in fear of being reduced to a simple status if they held on to their traditional lifestyle. Weber believed that it was this dilemma that stimulated a change to a capitalist-styled economy. Let me now speak of Weber's outlook on the emergence of capitalism. In 1896, Weber, in his lecture on the social causes of the decay of ancient civilization, did not consider the development of capitalist economy as being self-evident. While many scholars attributed the fall of Rome to calamitous mass migrations, Weber, on the other hand, considered it to be the result of a constant and gradual social change within the Roman Empire itself. It was also seen that in the early days, the ancient civic communities were largely based on slave labor. They relished a command on the coast and hence engaged themselves in industry and trade. But with the reduced supply of slave, their focus moved inland, thereby giving rise to a self-sufficient estate economy. So, what do you think happened next? Well, the ancient capitalist economy gradually collapsed and it led to a reversal of development with the culture once again becoming rural. However, Weber had a fear, the fear that the bureaucratization of society would triumph over capitalism much in the same manner. Coming to religious ethics and the spirit of capitalism, let me first state that Weber was not the first who gave a significant account of the relationship between Protestant ethic and spirit of capitalism. Weber, in his essay, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, contended that for the development of capitalist economy, it is traditionalism rather than political conditions that would act as a strong support to bring down its powerful contender. He debated that the standards of Puritanism that required a methodical pattern of working and abstinence from consumption invoked the rise of capitalism in all unawares. Later, Weber also investigated the relationship of the five great world religions, Confucianism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism and Islam, to economic ethics. He gave more importance to the diverse aspects of culture with a view to their religious and ethical ideas. And one of his renowned works in this respect was The Economy and Society, the section on religious communities that was written in 1913 but was published after his death. I remember having said that Weber not only studied the relationship of Protestantism to that of capitalism, but also five other major world religions to that of economic ethics. In this context, Weber made a remarkable discovery. He proposed that when a man starts thinking ahead, his religious feelings and experiences are treated intellectually, and slowly the world gets disenchanted as rationalization begins to overrule. Intellectualism suppresses belief in magic. The world's processes become disenchanted, lose their magical or their charismatic significance, and henceforth simply are and happen, but no longer signify anything. This process also encompassed other civilizational aspects such as economy, state, law, science and art. This particular notion of disenchantment, which I just mentioned, first appeared in an essay written by Weber in 1913, where his ideas on religion were discussed. Well, hence was the origin of disenchantment in his work. But you might be wondering, what is this concept about? Well, To cut the long story short, disenchantment to Weber refers to a reciprocal or complementary relationship between religion and modernization. No way does it signify a godless world, but it signifies a world where religion is transformed into a more theoretical and practical sphere of its own. Weber resolutely believed that we cannot explain modern culture without taking into account the history of religion. It is interesting to note that this conviction was influenced by two paradigms, pre-Arianism in Great Britain and a new type of historiography in Germany. Both these models were highly beneficial in Weber's understanding of modernization in terms of religious history and vice versa. Coming to pre-animistic religion on Great Britain, it is important to state of the British ethnologist Robert Ranald Marett. Marett, in his work on pre-animistic religion, explained the origins of religion from a fundamental experience of uncertainty and dependence rather than from an intellectual evolution. Emulating other scholars of religion of his time, Weber too accepted Marett's ideas on religion in his own understanding. Talking of the new historiography on Germany, an important thing which you should know is that unlike the British, the German Orientalists were involved with religious meanings and their subjective appropriation. For them, religion acted as a driving force in establishing positive or negative attitudes with respect to the world. Weber's religious communities was largely influenced by their works as well those of Hungarian scholars such as Julius Wellhausen, Ignaz Goldziher and Hermann Oldenburg. I will discuss about these scholars one by one. Many of you might have heard of Julius Wellhausen, the famous German biblical scholar and Orientalist. Wellhausen in his work offered an account of the history of ancient Israel and Judaism. He stated that the fifth book of Moses, Deuteronomy, found in 621 BC in the temple in Jerusalem and mandated the worship of Yahweh, the national god of the Iron Age kingdoms of Israel and Judah. It also ordered the annihilation of all other places of cultic worship which were outside Jerusalem. Prior to this, biblical prophets had already commanded the worshipping of Yahweh by obeying his commandments, without being disloyal. The king and priests of Judah obeyed this message only when the kingdom was exposed to military defeat. Subsequently, in this way, a true Jew came to be defined by ethics. However, true believers of God retained their old practices, and in doing so, they suffered. This resulted in theodicy, validation of a deity or his attributes, especially in regard to the existence of evil and suffering in the world. Wellhausen's ideas of ethics as a way of salvation, as well as the problem of theodicy, had an important influence on Weber's construction of the levels of disenchantment. Now, I move on to the views of Ignaz Goldziher on Islam. Goldziher, being a Hungarian scholar of Islam, worked extensively on this particular religion. He believed that Islam, in its emergence, was surrounded by certain Christian ideas such as asceticism and world denial. Later, these ideas were rejected when Islam intended to conquer the world and eventually became a religion of war and conquest. Such a biased emphasis engendered opposition from the Sufis, who opposed a purely legal and political Islam and established world denial as a greatly revered form of voluntary devotion. Let me now come to the ideas of Hermann Oldenburg and his work in India. Oldenburg was a German scholar of Indology who viewed the gods in early India as a personification of nature who could be called upon through sacrifice, prayer, and magic. The efficiency of these sacrifices and magic gave birth to the notion of Brahman, an ageless essence residing both in the universe and in the individual. Such notions of Brahman, along with that of transmigration of the soul, constituted the foundation on which Jainism and Buddhism emerged as religions of world denial. It is important to remember that apart from these scholars about whom I just spoke about, Weber also took into account the contributions of Paul Henneberg, a historian and publicist, in his reconstruction of religious history. In addition, he referred to the contribution of Hermann Seebeck, who had divided religion into earthy morality and salvation religions. Perhaps Weber referred to his work because of his understanding of religious history in terms of revocation of world denial. You see, German scholars always accentuated on the subjective form of history, that is, they concentrated on the cultural aspect rather than on the natural aspect or the natural laws. Such scholars believed that the diverse aspects of capitalism and the variety of practices of modern civilization needed an elucidation of actors and their beliefs. Hence, they had established a relationship between religious history and modernization. Let me speak of Ernst Troeltsch. Ernst Troeltsch, a German Protestant theologian, debated that there were three social forms of Christianity. These are the church, which upholds the means of salvation, the voluntary sect, a community of truly committed believers, and mysticism, the epitome of manifestation of radical individualism. In this way, he gave an idea of the diverse practical attitudes of the world as rendered by Christianity and which later had a great impact on a modern culture. However, Ferdinand Tönnies, Georg Simmel, Eberhard Gotthelf, Martin Buber, Hermann Kantorowicz, and also Max Weber had refused the ideas of Troeltsch. According to Weber, the three forms of Christianity were not absolutely distinct, rather they appeared in mixed form. According to him, churches were not the most compelling of the three social forms of Christianity, something which he had analyzed from the example of the United States, where it was the sects that had popularized Christianity and not the churches. Well, Weber also denied the idea of Ferdinand Tönnies, a German sociologist and philosopher, who had argued that distinguishable forms of Christianity depended on different economic classes. Also, Weber shunned the analysis of Georg Simmel, a German sociologist, and of Martin Buber, a philosopher, both of whom had identified mysticism as a psychological form. Weber deviated from these views and commented that rejecting religion would lead to encompassing those practices that are important to prove one's emotions and principles. Hence, these practices have a social dimension. You see, Weber differentiated the category of action to bring into his works new paradigms of religious history. He sought to make a sharp differentiation between the subjectively intended meaning and objectively valid meaning. This, as you all will already know, is in contrast with Ziemel's ideas, who did not distinguish between those two, treating them as though belonging together. Weber postulated this distinction with regard to his theory of action. He wrote, action, including intentional omission and acquiescence, is always intelligible behavior towards objects, behavior whose actual or intended subjective meaning may be more or less clear to the actor, whether consciously noted or not. For Ziemel, religion had its origin in a confused dimension of human life. Thus, even though he believed the meaning of an action to be different from an actor's motives, he failed to follow it. In contrast, Weber stated that religion provided actors with certain concepts of meaning which, in spite of being incomprehensive, constitute a part of their social interactions. Hence, meanings are different from personal motivations and are generated in religious communities. Let me now differentiate between subjectively rational instrumental action and action correctly oriented toward objectively valid goals for a clearer understanding. You see, for a researcher, an action may be highly instrumentally rational, yet it can be directed toward such assumptions of the actor that he or she finds invalid. In this regard, Weber believed that religiously or magically motivated behavior is comparably rational, for it is only when we review from modern views of nature that we can differentiate objectively between the correct and fallacious ascriptions, thereby designating the latter types as irrational. Another important point is that Weber regarded religion as a particular type of communal action. Let me speak of some attributes of communal action. You see, Communal actions have structures and laws of their own and are coupled with social interactions. They are also influenced by rationalization, which in turn further determines social interaction. It must be evident by now that for Weber, economy was also largely inclined by communal action and its autonomous structure. Such interrelationships provided the structure on which Weber's economy and society was based. Speaking of religion, Weber never tried to limit religion. Rather, he attempted to identify the social implications of religion on the constitution of social orders. Therefore, it is through the interaction of practical meaning between individuals and classes that the views and ethics of various religious communities trickle in the social orders of law, politics, and of course economics. In talking about the types of religious communities, let me first speak of the German scholar Hermann Ussener. As a scholar in philology and comparative religion, Ussener first introduced the concept of symbolic representation in 1896, which was later referred to by Weber. Ussener stated that the earliest human experience of such endless powers like mana, orenda, maga or charisma resulted in practical attitudes toward the world. These powers were fashioned into definite spiritual beings by symbolic abstraction and responded to the human quest of living in a meaningful world. Weber measured the pursuit Ussener spoke about and administered that it went together with the development of various religious specialists. He classified the religious specialists on the basis of their mediating. They are the magician, the priest, the prophet and the intellectual. First, you should note that the magician's charisma was represented by ecstasy. The magician, however, predominated in occasional forms of social associations and not in any permanent forms. Later, the requirement for a lastingly guaranteed social association was felt, and with this, the need for a specific God. In this way, gods of religious communities were created who became guardians of the legal order This evolution was accompanied by the rise of priests and stable cults who justified the permanence of social associations. Then the class of prophets came into being when the gods who acted as the guardians of the legal order failed to address growing ethical demands of the people. Finally came the intellectuals, the class that attempted to understand the world as meaningful cosmos and to take up a position toward it. They played a pivotal role in limiting one's belief in magic and in promoting disenchantment. Thus, these were the various divisions. As is evident, Weber acknowledged that the various social strata accepted worldviews and ethical doctrine that were in accordance with their economic and political position. In this sense, the religious preferences of peasants were mainly for tradition and magic. That of warrior nobles were mode of conquest, while that of bureaucrats were mode of regulating the masses. In his discussion on religious operating in the disenchanted world, Weber said that the more a religion of salvation projected itself as an ethic of commitment, the more its believers experienced tension, which then led to new types of religiosity. In fact, Weber vehemently stated that such tensions could be reduced either by mysticism or asceticism. So, the new religious practices emerging from such tensions became mandatory for the religions working in the disenchanted world. But not that Weber never considered the modern culture as a godless one. What he intended to clarify is that the less the members of modern culture find meaning in nature and history, the more the search for meaning is thrown back to them. Therefore, religions become the basis for the conduct of life dependent upon subjective individual decisions. Thus, gods come to exist in this culture. In his famous speech, Science as Vocation, in the year 1917, Weber said, "Today, the routines of everyday life challenge religion. Many old gods ascend from their graves. They are disenchanted and hence take the form of impersonal forces. They strive to gain power over our lives, and again they resumed their eternal struggle with one another. To summarize, let me say in conclusion that for many years Weber's sociology of religion was contemplated as a theory of secularization. With modernity, social institutions and the fundamental significance of religious beliefs and practices devaluated to the private sphere only. However, for Weber, the force of disenchantment gave rise to new types of religiosity, and in this guise, institutional religion surfaced the path for individual religiosity. Therefore, Weber's perception of disenchantment is of paramount significance, especially in analyzing the current rise and the diffused apocalypticism. That is to say, the religious belief that the world will come to an end, as well as esotericism, which signifies the belief in esoteric opinions. With this, I come to an end of the discussion on religion and modernization in the eyes of Max Weber. Thank you for attending the lecture. We will meet in some other discussion on some other topic.